I took some advice from a mentor of mine, and they said that if you can develop in that market, you can pretty much develop in any market. So I think the learning for me, Justin, was making sure that when you acquire the site, you're acquiring at the right price.
You are listening to the Property Developer Podcast, your home for tips, ideas and inspiration to help take your developing to the next level. Now here's your host, Justin Getty.
Hello and welcome to episode 86 of the show. Thanks for joining me. How are you doing? Keeping well, I trust? Got a great chat coming up for you today. I think you'll enjoy it. Speaking with a colleague of mine who's done a number of small unit projects, and we discuss some of the lessons he's learned along the way. Before we get to that, here's what's happening with my own projects. My recently finished development has essentially wrapped up. All the settlements have now concluded. We still have one last property on the market and it's going through a sales campaign now. And I'm hopeful that it will be sold by Christmas. On my other project, we have just obtained the building permit, so I have informed the builder that they can get ready to take over the site. Can't wait to see some construction action on that project after so many COVID delays over the past year and a half. I don't know about you, but I've found that things have taken way longer to get done this year and time's just really drifted past. Hopefully things speed up over the coming year. Now, before we jump in and start talking with today's guest about small-scale property developments, if you are interested in learning how to develop property, then be sure to take a look at my online training program called the Property Developer Training at www.propertydevelopertraining.com. In the training, I take you step by step through the property development process and show you how to find, deliver, and wrap up a small-scale development. We've had so many new members over the past few weeks that I can't possibly thank them all individually, but it's been so exciting to see so many people taking control of their future by learning how to do property development. Take a look if developing is something you've been wanting to get into. Don't forget, you can always catch me on Insta and Facebook with my latest project updates and other news under the handle of Property Developer Podcast. And remember to dig back into the archives and take a listen to some of the fantastic past guests I've had on the show, including a great chat I had with developer Jonathan Hallinan back in episode 77. While Jonathan has done some amazing projects, including high-rise towers, he did start off doing some humble renovations and spent a lot of time and effort trying to maximize his returns.
Well, you know, it was a very successful project. I bought the front house for 90 grand. I spent, just my carpentry apprenticeship money and a little bit of weekend project money renovating it. Remember, I sold that front house and made $100,000. And remember, I bought the whole property for only 90. So to make $100,000, I'm now only 20, was like I thought I was the king. It was just incredible. Then I spent that 100,000 building the unit on the back. I lived in the front one, so it was obviously my principal place. It was tax-free. I then moved into the back one, principal place tax-free, made another $100,000 on that. And then I had 200,000. And then I went and bought a number of 2, 3, 4 unit sites.
Jonathan shares so much gold in that chat, so I encourage you to go back and take a listen to episode 77. It was certainly a highlight for me to speak with Jonathan. Okay, on to today's guest, Paul Wilding from Raphael & Co. Property Group. I've known Paul for a few years now, and he's been doing a number of small unit projects around Melbourne, some in similar areas to my own projects. Paul has taken the quintessential development journey, going from a small renovation project through to managing multiple small unit developments. Paul shares his insight into what he's learnt along the way, including the importance of understanding market dynamics, how to start and grow a developing business, and how to research and analyse a new area to ensure you are delivering a product that meets market expectations. There's lots of practical advice and insight in this conversation, and I'm sure you will enjoy it. I kicked off by asking Paul about his favourite food.
Yeah, I think for me, Justin, it's going to be pizza. And it's generally half and half. So it's half a Hawaiian and half the hot without anchovies.
Best of both worlds.
Exactly, mate, exactly.
And like big, heavy type pizza or the light touch, light topping style?
Oh, it's a good question. Generally, more topping the better for me, mate. So,
Very good. Well, you and I have been friends or colleagues for a number of years now. We actually do projects in a similar part of town. So give us a bit of a background on your projects and how you got into developing.
yeah, good question, Justin. So for me, I was actually in a corporate role, so that was my background. A colleague spoke to me about a property investment seminar, and I thought at the time, well, I had a look around the office, and I thought, there's sort of no one around this office that I aspire to be by the time I'm 65. So there's got to be another way. And I took the punt and I went and did an education seminar and quite liked the content around property. And then I took that further and I continued with those sort of weekly sort of seminars and it essentially got educated. But as you and I both know, Justin, they're as good as someone's, I guess, what you put in is what you sort of get out of those. And then the difference between a flashy seminar or a textbook and reality is even another step. So for me, I guess it gave me guidance. So Justin, when I bought my first property in 2013, that I wanted a property where I could manufacture my own growth. And in doing so, I bought a dual occupancy. And so the front house needed a bit of work. I renovated the front house, subdivided and built obviously a new dwelling on the back and had a pretty good outcome overall from a project perspective. And that essentially, I guess, started my property development career. Just starting smaller projects of dual occupancy and then moving more recently into some multi-units.
Now, just before you get onto that, with the Renault, were you on the tools doing the renovation or did you get other people to do it for you?
Yeah, good question. Look, my brother's a carpenter, so he has come from, a trade background, so that has helped, and that has also assisted in terms of keeping some costs down that first project. But I'm not one not to get my hands dirty, so if it means getting a paintbrush and doing that sort of stuff, it's pretty much whatever it needed at the time. I didn't come from a lot of money, so this was obviously the first project bought in with a 95% LVR at the time, and essentially wanted a property where I could manufacture my own growth out of that, and then obviously set myself up financially for the next project, larger projects.
So you did do a fair bit of work yourself on the Renault.
Yes. It would have been, after working full time, Justin, on the paintbrush, probably to 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
Whatever it was going to take, sort of thing. So, yeah.
All right. And from there, what was next?
So from there, I moved in. I did subdivided, built a brand new dwelling on the back. For myself, it, I guess, made sense to relocate from the renovation property into obviously a new dwelling, and that was a decision more around obviously taxes. But for me, it was I sold the front one to be able to get me into my next project was a multi-unit for development site. So the equity that I was able to withdraw obviously gave me that next step in terms of being able to acquire the site, get planning approval, and build 4 townhouses. So. And
what was that like? That step from duplex to 4-unit site? It's a reasonable step to take. What was your thinking behind that?
Yeah, I thought it was probably the next step. But you're right, Justin. There's a lot of, I guess, technical things that do change in terms of cancel contributions. As an example of that, once you get beyond the dual occupancy, you're paying cancel contributions. Other issues around obviously servicing and so forth, titles. I guess for me, Justin, it was probably I wasn't aware of what was required, and I'm a believer in the only way you can really sort of do it is actually experiencing yourself. And once you get that learnings, you can never unlearn is probably the best way of putting it. So you work through that process. And I mean, I'm still doing obviously multis that you're aware of now, but I'm still learning, daily. You got different challenges. But I would put it, if it's 3 or if it's 6, the process is generally the same. You just might have more requirements from a lending perspective in terms of pre-sales or whatever your exit strategy is. So in terms of, I guess, once you get beyond the duplex, from my perspective, the process is quite sort of similar. So, yeah.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because that's why I put together my property developer training program to help teach people the process and the life cycle of a project. Because yes, once you understand the cycle and the process, it's actually very similar on the different scales. Like the 3 and 4 unit sites are actually very similar to your 14 unit site or your 20 unit site. It's basically the same process. There's just more zeros involved and a few more steps along the way, or a few more things to do, but essentially it's the same process.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the major probably learning for myself was moving from what I would say is traditional residential lending to more commercial lending as well. And as you know, as you more townhouses, that's sort of the banks will, the lenders will mitigate their own risks, and so you do move into that commercial space.
And so what did you learn from the 4 townhouse project? Was it successful? There's always bumps along the way, but were there any biggies, or what'd you learn?
It was relatively smooth, Justin, in the sense of, with what was within control. And I guess what I mean by that is, I was able to achieve, the planning permit, construction, I guess cost was managed appropriately at the time. What I wasn't able to control was the cycle of the market. And if I think about back into 2018, when you and I were discussing things, that the market was on almost like, due to APRA lending constraints, the market was sort of on I'd say a downward spiral for probably a period of up to 15 months. And as you and I know, when you're managing a project over a 24-month life cycle, if you buy in when the market's, I'd say what it is today is a good example. You don't know where it's going to be in 2 years' time. So I think probably the important thing was making sure that I bought the land or acquired the land at the right price. And in terms of what I do, just in terms of my GRV, I try and keep it quite conservative. I look at comparable sales at this point in time. So I'm not looking to inflate things and try and predict where the market will be in 2 years' time. I'd prefer to be more conservative with the GRV and actually, say, well, if I get an extra 5% in 2 years' time, fantastic. But if I don't, then I'm covered as well. Because I found back in the 2018 cycle, the market was, I guess it was pretty flat. There was a lot of constraints around lending, both for developers but anyone purchasing, and it was a tough market to sell in. And I think you and I joked at the time, even agents had to relearn how to sell product. So I think I took some advice from a mentor of mine, and they said that if you can develop in that market, you can pretty much develop in any market. So I think the learning for me, Justin, was making sure that when you acquire the site, you're acquiring it at the right price, but also controlling your construction costs and having multiple exit strategies towards the end, because you cannot predict where the market will be in 2 years' time, but the decisions you can make, I guess, up front can mitigate any risk. So that's probably the biggest learning with that project. But overall, a strong outcome under the circumstance.
Yeah, and I think that's a good part about property developing, is that you can generate and have multiple exit strategies. And I think there's other property investment options that perhaps don't have the same number of exit strategy possibilities that small developments do.
Yep, absolutely agree with that.
And I remember back then, land prices didn't really drop that much. So end sale prices were a bit soft, but land prices didn't really come back that much. So it made it all the more challenging to try and acquire something that worked at the time.
Yes. And I think we're experiencing that now, Justin, as well. Just in the land values, it's the opposite end of the cycle is probably the best way of putting it, where, if I sort of had the crystal ball now, I would have probably over the last 12 months acquired a few more sites. I've been probably a bit more conservative in reducing debt. As you know, I've just completed 6 townhouses. So I've been sort of reducing debt and probably haven't been, acquiring as many sites as I normally would. Just looking at the local Melbourne market, I mean, we've come out of something like 260 days of lockdown. So if you asked me, Justin, would the market be the way it is now after 260 days of lockdown? I wouldn't have been able to predict that. So,
yeah, it's definitely challenging at the moment in terms of the market because land prices have gone up and sales prices have also gone up. But now we've got these crazy rises in construction costs. So I think with developing, I think there's always a phase of the developing cycle that's more difficult than other parts at different times, whether it's acquiring the land, selling the end product, or getting decent construction prices. There's always a part of it that's not quite as easy as, say, some of the other bits.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Probably for me, it's always been around the finance and I guess the lenders and I guess their requirements and their tactics, Justin, at times with say a low valuation and wait a minute, need to come up with more equity to fund the project. So I've turned my head around a few years ago. If you asked me the question around how do I deal with finance, I would have been it's frustrating. Now I see it as an opportunity. It's a learning opportunity. And I think it's the only way you can sort of frame your mindset towards it because it's not straightforward. And depending on different lenders, they got different requirements. And if it's 2 or if it's 6, they're going to you're going to be different finance as well. And I guess different capital investment as well required. So
yes, I often talk about that on this show and also in the training about embracing the challenges of property developing because they keep coming up. So you need to see them as an opportunity to learn and grow rather than shrinking back from it. But at times that can be challenging.
Absolutely.
Oh, and I also call the finance side the dark arts that the lenders try to employ to pull the wool over your eyes, and some of the terms and the language that they use, just baffling.
Yeah, or I think if again we think about 2018, and I think the purpose of me going back there is just to encourage your listeners to appreciate the cycle, because 2018 you had lenders that would have demonstrated an appetite for development at the time for the previous 10 years to be pretty much out of development. Now all those lenders, first tier, second tier, are all back in. We've got the appetite back again. So, and we're seeing, APRA, I guess, do what I would consider minor tweaks at the moment. And we discussed just before, probably, there's probably about a 5% reduction in terms of, I guess, someone's serviceability at this point in time. And I'm predicting, that, not sure where this will sort of go, but I would expect probably the market to have to soften in the 2022. So the question I would put, what does that mean from the lenders? Are we going to see that the lenders that have been, quite, have had the appetite more recently for multi-unit development? Is their risk appetite going to sort of change over the next 12 to 24 months? And I think no one sort of knows the answers except for the lenders. So,
well, I'm not sure they even know at some stages. Then what happened after the 4-unit site? What was next?
So I decided to, after the 4, I went back and did a duplex. and I wanted a 12-month project. So I bought one down in Melbourne southeast, and I had done a fair bit of market research around the target area, really sort of had a focus on what end product was selling and what the local market wanted. And I sort of made the deliberate move away from what I would have considered a generic sort of townhouse stock to more of a higher end sort of duplex finish. And probably the learnings in that project, apart from being in and out in 12 months, because I bought it with a permit in place, but then I made some minor amendments just to make sure I got the design right. But the market itself sort of took off late sort of 19 into 20, and or continues now, as we know. I was in and out in 12 months, and the duplex, I had support from council, and we were discussing that before in terms of some councils are quite they advocate for development, and you have others where it's like trying to get blood out of stone at times, and everything appears to be an unnecessary fight, and maybe at times councils may forget who their customers are at times. But the benefit about this project, apart from being in and out in 12 months, was the return was upwards of 25%. Being a duplex under residential lending as well, a lot less, I guess, capital required. I'd call out for your listeners, it is a learning from that is, as you've got less stock, I'd just say that you need to get your margins even, I guess, it's more critical to get those right, because I made that move to more into a higher end sort of market, and whilst I had a very good outcome, I still had to control the construction costs and make sure that I weren't over capitalising, because as I said, your margins with less stock are actually even more thin. If you say, for example, if you've got 6 townhouses, you can probably afford to lose 5% on each, but if you've only got 2, you can't afford to lose 20% overall. So it can be make or break. So I think I'd just encourage your listeners, Justin, to get educated, do their own market research, make sure they're using comparable sales in the last 3 months, making sure they're acquiring the land at the right price, making sure what they're putting through council is going to be an appropriate and is going to be in demand as well. And for that project was quite smooth sailing, and so much so I'm currently looking at doing a number of duplexes at the moment as well. So I've just finished 6 townhouses, as you're aware, Justin, which was the project after the duplex. And I don't know how do I put this other than I'd say that it was harder to get the permit than what it was to construct the townhouses. In fact, you can get the townhouses completed quicker than what you can get a permit at times, which just sounds crazy when all the media is reporting there's not enough homes for people, and as developers we're generally trying to have a desirable end product that people want to be able to call their home. And it shouldn't take, in my view, 12 months to get a permit through. And when you can build 6 townhouses in 10 months, for example. So
yeah, no, I absolutely think it's ridiculous that it takes minimum 2 years to bring a 4 townhouse project to market, supposedly when we have a shortage of houses.
Yes, absolutely agree.
I want to come back to the 6 townhouse project, but just going back to the duplex, you said you went back and made some amendments to the permit. What were you looking to change? What was it that you didn't think quite worked?
Good question. So I noticed that in the area, it was in an area that had, so I think the listeners will sort of, pick this up pretty quickly, but it was a high desirable school zones within the southeast. And really, so the designs that are important there, so it's your traditional sort of 4-bedroom, 3-bath townhouse. But I think what was important was that you look at the demographic in those areas, and generally they want a master bedroom downstairs. And then in addition to that, I put like a kids retreat upstairs and almost mirrored the master bedroom downstairs upstairs as well. So, the end product was desirable for, I guess a family with multi-generational. So they might have, the grandma or the grandpa live downstairs. And then upstairs, it's sort of, more the family. So you've got, the kids and the wife and the husband generally. And I found having those, I guess, the kids retreat upstairs and also having a master bedroom downstairs be quite desirable. As obviously an end sale perspective and from a demand perspective. But I think the other thing important with the duplex is that I'd encourage listeners when I acquired the site, the plans were, townhouse, I guess one was larger than townhouse two and had different, layout. And my view was if you want to generally, control construction costs, it would make sense to mirror and, mirror the size and mirror the design. And that's essentially what I did. So I made some minor amendments, obviously, to the layout, but I just made sure that, essentially I was mirroring the floor plan as well, because my exit strategy with that project was just to probably reduce some of the costs associated with marketing and selling at the end. Was in that suburb, it was, auctions were obviously prominent. So I took that property to auction. And I guess anyone sort of bidding wasn't aware that the second dwelling was also for sale. So the process was to all things going right, attract obviously a bit of demand and a bit of competition, and then for the person that unfortunately missed out, there is another product available, and that's the strategy that I took into that project.
And you said you did a fair bit of research in the lead up to the acquisition. What were you doing there to satisfy yourself of what the demand was?
Yeah, good question. So for me, I was probably fundamentally looking at square metre rates, Justin. So I was looking at, what can I acquire an old dwelling, for example, on 700 square metres, and what can I sell out new product at? And at the time, you're sort of getting, 3 times the land value. So it just, it was a bit of a no-brainer. But what was important was making sure that your end product was also desirable. You didn't over-capitalise for the local market, but I guess the spec was appropriate. So you can obviously, attract, obviously, the sell point that you need to obviously exit. So I did a bit of due diligence. I do look at comparable sales. I do my square metre rates, and that's pretty much the main gist of it.
So you've obviously, I presume you were talking to a lot of local agents, asking them what the market wanted.
Not necessarily. I find at times, Justin, agents, no disrespect to the agents, but I'll tell you sort of what you want to hear. So I would encourage your listeners to I think, yes, consult professionals, but at the same time, go and test that theory as well. And I think there's no better way than sort of, getting on council websites, having a look at, plans that are being submitted, looking at, REA, for example, and looking at, what's recently sold and how much, and then also looking at end products and what is desirable and why are some getting higher than others. And I think it's important to sort of know that. I'd encourage also your listeners to get down to the auctions, go through both. I guess a standard old house, for example, go to an auctioneer and see what it's getting in the local area, but also go to a end product and go to one of those auctions as well, and then understand why is that getting more, what is the demand, what finishes, why is the spec different, what is required for the local market. So I'd encourage listeners not just to obviously speak to local agents, but I would encourage them to actually go and do some of the legwork themselves to have some confidence.
Yeah, it's really important, because the thing to keep in mind when you're talking to agents is that they are going to tell you what's easy for them to sell. What's the easiest thing for them to sell? And that's probably going to be the more bells and whistles, the better, at the lowest possible price. Because the agents just want to get a quick sale, really. Not all of them, but that's kind of what they want, is a relatively quick and easy sale. So that's where, as you say, you got to get down to the ground and have a look at what's for sale and what it looks like, what it feels like, and then you can make your own decision about what to include.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then the duplex reminded you that there wasn't enough pain and pleasure in doing a project, and you wanted to get back into something a bit bigger.
Yeah, so after that one, Justin, I've obviously more recently completed 6 townhouses, and look, a lot of lessons learned along the way. Again, got one currently on the market at the moment for sale. I took some advice from a developer a few years ago, and I asked him essentially, if you could change anything, what would you do differently now? And it's one of the questions that you ask your obviously podcast presenters. And the feedback was, if I could retain some stock, I would have. And so I've made sure that with my multis, I've retained some stock, and I do it deliberately. And I think probably the other thing that I would like to call out, when I design the townhouses, I do it with the mind of, could I live there myself? And the reason being, if you can sort of, do your design that way, and I think you get better outcomes in terms of practicality, and you just, I guess it's more livable. So for myself, with the 6 townhouses, and you've seen them, Justin, I've used sort of a matrix cladding, which on the exterior, it's sort of, not, you won't see it around our neck of the woods generally. You see it sort of inner city. But I guess for myself, I guess I do more, boutique small developments. So I want to be able to, in 10 years' time, drive past the site and be very proud. And so for myself, my level of finish, or the materials I'm using, I'm not necessarily looking for the cheapest product. I'm looking for something I could feel proud about, that is a great end product, for someone, whoever's going to buy the product. And where I can, I try and retain some product as well. Obviously, listening to a previous mentor. So more recently completed 6 townhouses. Had some initial issues with council and some hiccups along the way. Got there in the end. What wasn't an easy process, as you know, dealing with our local council at times can be, I guess, cumbersome. But I think if there's any learning from that, and I think you were hinting on it before, Justin, around the resilience required for developers, and I would just encourage your listeners, something that sits close to me, is terminology of don't just accept no for the answer. So and I guess what I'm saying in that is, be solution focused. So if someone says no, look for an alternative. And I know sometimes at VCAT, it's not as straightforward as that. But I guess you can resubmit new plans and go through a new application, take on board their feedback. But I guess if you go into a development project with a mentality of not necessarily accepting no, it keeps you being solution focused, and if it means that you need to engage another consultant or a professional to get more advice because you've run into a roadblock or cancel or something like that, I just encourage all your listeners to go in with that mentality and focus on being solution minded, as opposed to just accepting no. Because in all my developments, there's obviously been quite a few no's, but you wouldn't get to where you are if you don't find solutions. So
it's a really good point. I brought it up in the training as well for people because I wanted them to know that no doesn't always mean no.
yeah,
It's for a lot of people, no is just an instinctive response. A lot of council officers, even a lot of and consultants, they can be conservative, and so in order to try and protect themselves or protect you, they'll give you a conservative answer, and that answer might be no. But if you probe a bit further or ask questions or seek some alternative advice, more often than not, you can actually come up with a solution to get around what that objection is.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. So I guess, so I've got one for sale currently at the moment. I probably expect, within 60 days, that'll be done and dusted and project complete. So I've recently just got some plans on another duplex, which I'm excited to obviously start turning some soil shortly on that project. And then I think I'm also now looking to acquire another multi-site. So I'm just sort of doing some due diligence at the moment, getting in contact with a number of agents and seeing what may present over the coming months. But I'm also a little mindful of where the market's currently at and what 2022 and 2023 may sort of look like. But if you my view is if you pay the right price and do your due diligence and use conservative GRVs in the current market, there's no use worrying where 2022 or 2023 may be. Worst case scenario, as you know, Justin, you can retain some stock and pull the equity out and move on to the next project. So I think for me, being able to manufacture the growth and do the due diligence and obviously get the GRVs right and get obviously the feasibility right, that's sort of where my focus is in the next I guess 2 years, because you can't control what's happening essentially in the market. So but you can obviously mitigate any risk. So that's the approach that I'll be taking.
Yeah, and my view is almost your worst case scenario, if you plan your project correctly, is that you end up with an asset, a built physical asset that gives you some options, whether you have to sell that cheaply or whether you find a way to hold on to it. But you do have some options for a physical asset that should over time appreciate in value.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, at the end, you got a wholesale product at a pretty much a retail price. So no, you're right. Worst case, pull some equity out and move on to the next.
So tell me, what have you learned about yourself along the way through your developing journey?
Yeah, good question. I think there's been a few sleepless nights, Justin. I find
you're another guest on the podcast who obviously lost a bit of hair along the way as well.
Yes, and going grey as we speak as well. So.
It's lucky it's a podcast and no one gets to see the lack of hair on the head of my guests.
Look, someone asked me yesterday about development, and I sort of described it in almost stages, and I think what I mean by that, Justin, is, and this, when you're looking to acquire sites, you get busy all of a sudden, and then you get into planning, you sort of, you're doing your design work, so you're very busy again. Then you submit to council, and you're sort of scratching your head looking for something to do for a couple of months, unless you've got obviously pre-sale requirements and all that sort of thing, and that. And then, before you know it again, you're back into it. You're getting obviously your building permit ready, and you want to obviously engage your builder, and you want to do your drawings and all that sort of construction plans. So you start getting busy again, and then essentially you're waiting for that stamp from council that you and I sort of joke about now. How long does it sort of take at times? But then you find you've got some sort of time up your sleeve again, and you hand over to the builder, and the builder gets on their merry way. and you're sort of there more sort of keeping an eye on the progress. But again, it's not that busy for you as a developer at that point in time, but you're starting to consider your exit strategy and you're looking at the market and who you're going to engage to sell your product and all sorts. But again, it's not that busy. But then you get towards the end and you're managing your subdivision, and you want to get your titles through, and if it's not dealing with the land survey, then you're dealing with a conveyancer and a lender potentially with consent, and obviously cancel with consent as well, and you're busy again, and then you essentially hand over to an agent at the end, and again you're scratching your head going, well, where to sort of next? You're not so busy. You're letting the agent do what they need to do. And you're starting to look for another site. So I found I described almost the development cycle sort of like, you're running at a fast pace, or you're sprinting almost, and then you're sort of slowing down, then you're sprinting again, and it continues in that cycle. And I think what I've done over the last couple of years, because I'm sort of trying now to manage multiple projects, I'm trying to essentially, from a business perspective, have some in construction as others are going through planning. And I find as your experience and your skill set, improves over the years, over the journey, you can manage multiple projects at different times. And I think, essentially what I'm sort of, advising the listeners to do is probably start small, get the experience up, and evolve. And I think that's sort of important, because there are differences obviously between a duplex and some multi-units, and what consultants are required, and council's appetite, and the roadblocks that we experience as developers. So I think my message, really has been, over the last few years, I've moved into managing multiple projects, and I'd encourage all your listeners, as they go on their development journey, to don't sort of necessarily get caught up in the big players in town. That's something to aspire if you want to go there, but just understand that they started small as well, and I'd encourage your listeners to obviously start smaller. I know you haven't taken my advice, Justin, the size of your project, but I would encourage them. Development is sort of evolution, and I still learn daily with all my projects, and that's what gets me up in sort of in the morning and wanting to continue aspiring towards obviously property development career. So
yeah, well, I had that this year where two projects, for whatever reason, ended up kind of overlapping, with one big project finishing up and concluding right as I was starting to try and get another one out of the ground, and that was had its moments, Paul, trying to juggle that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And tell me, what about the greatest challenge that you would have faced in delivering a project?
It's probably good learning for all the listeners out there. Was I guess the 6 townhouse project just recently completed. So there's probably a few learnings here. So I acquired the site with a 12-month settlement, and obviously early access is one of the provisions, because I wanted to get planning underway. And essentially, so the 12-month settlement had all, it could be extended by the vendor, and so obviously I went through the planning process. I had the challenges with council around obviously what they thought was best use of the site versus, in reality, what in my view, based on zoning and overlays and I guess professional feedback, what was my view of best use of the site. So there's a number of sort of toing and froing in terms of there, and look, in the end I did get I guess the desired outcome in terms of the 6. But I guess I would, I want to share the story that, it's important to build a relationship with obviously the town planner at council, so you can keep them, I guess, as on side as possible. And whilst it can get extremely frustrating at times, I think it's important to maintain a level of professionalism. And I did talk to you, Justin, before about sometimes I do feel like councils have forgotten who the real customer is. And that is us as developers, because there are a number of fees that we pay to support the process that obviously keeps planners in planning roles. And so if I talk about that project, so I got the permit through. The vendor did ask for an extension because essentially the vendor was waiting on another townhouse to be built for him to be able to move into. So I got an extension, and it was just right at a time when the market was really sort of softening up, and it was sort of the back end of 2019 or mid 2019. And so I had to get a new valuation done from a lender that I was looking to use. And it really come in very low, like the valuation come in very low. The valuer did not use what I would say is, I guess, a comparable site because there was low stock at the time. And so a valuer is using just for example, 1,600 square metre site that has got no development potential versus my site that has a permit in place for 6, all the zoning required, all the overlays, and it's so comparing apples with oranges as opposed to apples with apples. And essentially, the lender's position was, well, if you want to settle, you're going to have to put in more capital, and it really sort of was at roadblock pretty much almost probably 3 days before it was meant to settle. And so I went to the vendor and requested an extension, and because obviously he was still waiting to move into his townhouse, he supported that, and it gave me the option of getting another valuation or looking at alternative lenders. And I guess the reason I wanted to share that, Justin, because in the end, I used a private investor as opposed to a lender. So I guess probably a message for listeners out there: you don't necessarily always need to use the lenders or the banks. But I probably do want to also, just I guess flag with the listeners that what was on the line at the time was pretty much my deposits. All 12 months worth of work in the planning and the planning permit as well, if I wasn't able to obviously get the capital required to settle the site. So that's why I do emphasise, as developers, I guess gain experience and evolve. I guess the more dwellings, the more capital requirement as well. So I'd encourage, that's why I do encourage people to generally start with small developers and work their way up, because the capital requirements can change significantly. The market has an impact on that. If you get low valuations, you've got more capital requirements to put into the project. And worst case scenario, you could lose 12 months of hard work getting a permit in place and not be able to settle the site. So, but I guess when I applied the don't accept no, Justin, that we spoke about before, and I looked for other solutions, I found a private investor that was able to obviously settle the land, and without having to use a lender, and that has made things a lot easier now in terms of the exit of the project also.
Well, it's funny, I had exactly the same experience earlier this year with a valuer. Same conversation with the valuation of my site with the permit in place, where they compared it to a block a couple of doors up, which was a raw site with no permit, and they were trying to value it based on that. I had the same conversation with them. How can you use that valuation over there, or a square meter rate for this raw block of land, versus my site that has the permit, that has eliminated the planning risk? How does that work? Surely you should be able to see the increased value.
Yeah, absolutely. And more, I think, more recently I've seen, Justin, the banks, to mitigate, their own risk, they're applying pretty much the costs, I guess the soft costs that you put into a project, and just, applying that really and saying, well, we think the site's, your contract price plus your soft costs. And they're not even considering, well, you've got your permit, and you've essentially got your subdivision approval there as well, and they should be obviously looking at, I guess, true land values based on your lot sizes, and then obviously your end product as well. So
yes, they don't like to miss out the lenders, do they? They'll find the ways to maximise their returns and minimise their opportunity for missing out.
absolutely.
And then what about going back, if you could change one thing about your developing career, what do you reckon it would be?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, Justin, for me, I'm at a stage now where I need to invest in resourcing, and I guess what I mean by that is, being a developer on your own, as you sort of know what it's like. I mean, you're managing everything from acquisition right through to obviously title process at the end, and so I'm at a stage sort of now where I need to invest in resourcing, and what I mean by that is I need to bring someone on within the business, and the truth is I probably should have done it a couple of years ago, and it would have sort of I guess grown my ability to manage more than 2 projects at any one time, and and then obviously more recently we've had obviously significant lockdowns in the Melbourne area over the last few years as well. So for me it was really probably I've taken a conservative approach, and now I'm regretting it a little bit in the sense that I probably needed to put in the investment early on so I can grow the business, and I'm currently working through that at this point in time. And so I've sort of identified that really I'm looking for someone who has the opposite skill set of myself. And I think what I mean by that, it's just it'll allow myself to a degree to free up my time in probably the areas where I'm not so strong, and allow someone to focus on that. And I can obviously really focus on acquiring sites and exit strategies and doing the feasibility and all that. So I'm probably looking for someone that can really support the process around the construction management and so forth as well, because I don't come, my background is not a trade background. Whilst, as you know, Justin, you pick a lot up along the way through multiple projects. But for me, I'm looking to bring a skill set into the business that's quite sort of opposite to my background. And in doing so, I can obviously, I guess, coach and mentor, I guess, someone, from an end-to-end development perspective. But we're going to have someone that sort of really specialises predominantly, in some form of surveying or planning, or even, I guess, construction management. So that's probably what I want to do just in the next 6 to 12 months. So,
well, I was going to start polishing up my resume and getting it ready to send it through to you.
Send it through, mate. I'll take it tomorrow.
Paul, what about your top tip for developers out there who might be looking to take their business to the next level, their developing business to the next level?
Yeah, I'll probably just go back, Justin, to, I'll put this way. It can be a long time between drinks in development. And I guess what I'm essentially saying there is that projects can take 24 months from acquisition through to completion. And there's a lot of, I guess, capital requirements early on and along the way. And then you get towards the end of the project, or you get at the end of the project and all things going well, you get a decent drink at the end, and then you go, I wish I did 2 of those. And I guess I would just go back to the listeners and say, allow yourself time to get your skills up and get educated and apply, I guess, the practical learnings. And don't be too hard on yourself, in the sense that, what you learn through a project, you cannot, you cannot unlearn that. So, and I'd finish by saying, Justin, just, don't accept no for an answer and always be solution minded. And it's almost like, visualize, and I know you and I are big on this in terms of, visualizing your end product and seeing, what the end product will look like in a couple of years' time. And you can do that through obviously your design work, your town planning and stuff like that. And you can get obviously, all your marketing content done for, off the plan and so forth as well, where you can sort of have some material that you can sort of see the end product, and control what's within your control. So, yeah.
Actually, I wanted to draw on that point that you just made about learning and experiences along the way, because you really can't get any experience until you do it. So I get emails from people about this, and you can learn all you want from the textbooks, and you can become familiar with the process and understand the cycle and the steps, and that's all great. That's really helpful, because then you can understand what's going to happen along the way. But at some point, you got to jump off at the beginning. You got to jump off, and you got to dive into the pool and get wet and start swimming, and then stuff's going to happen that's unpredictable. But it's the only way that you're going to get experience. And then after you've done your first project, you may be able to attest to this, you kind of go, oh, it's done, I did it. And then the mystique and the mystery and the fog lifts, and then you feel better prepared for the next one, knowing that, again, there's going to be stuff that you're going to come across along the way that you just have to deal with, find a solution and keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. And
so the question that I wanted to ask you was, when you took that leap for that first project that you purchased, what helped you make the jump?
Yeah, I think it was reflecting around, looking around the office, Justin, and not seeing anyone that and not, no disrespect meant to anyone in the office at that time, but it was pretty much, when I was 60, when I get to 65, I don't want to be, going to the office every day, doing a 40, 50-hour work. That's sort of, is certainly not what I aspire to. For me, it's been really about growing my development career and giving, I guess, myself, my family some options. I can spend time with the young one and have a level of flexibility in terms of what I do. So that's, I think, the reason why I've done, or I continue to do development, because of the obviously the options that it presents. But having said that, I don't want people to feel like it's easy either, because I think you need to sort of do your due diligence. You need to get educated. You need to have a good support network around you. Like this podcast is a great example of that. And I guess you've got to be resilient enough to find solutions when roadblocks present. And I would just encourage your listeners to start small and evolve and work through the process and get the skill set. And I think your course, Justin's a great starting point for aspiring developers that want to learn off experienced developers that were once in the same position they were a number of years ago.
Oh, well, thanks for the plug, Paul. If people want to go to propertydevelopertraining.com, they can find out more about what's in the training. So thanks for the lead in there. It's funny that you should say about looking around the office and seeing or not seeing any roles that you aspired to do, because that's the exact same thing that happened to me when I was working in corporate. And I remember going on a professional development course, and one of the instructors asked that very question, one-on-one session they had with me. And they're like, well, when you look up the line, whose role, who's the person that you want to be, or which role would you love to move into? And I remember sitting there reflecting and looking up the line at my direct manager, then the director of the business unit, then the executive director of the area that we were in, and then the CEO of the organization. And I just kept shaking my head at each of those roles.
Yeah.
And thought, well, this obviously is not really what you want to do. And I think there was a kernel in there, a kernel of change that started happening in there around doing something different, which eventually evolved into me getting into property development. But it's a really useful exercise for people to do in terms of the job they're in now. If they look up the line, do they see someone and see a role that they would love to do? And if they do, great, go for it. If they don't, maybe start contemplating, well, what is it you really would love to be doing?
Absolutely, and taking the leap of faith, Justin, as we spoke about.
Yeah, that leap of faith is a big step for a lot of people. So, what about the biggest trap that you see developers falling into, Paul?
Yeah, I would say probably, overpaying for a site, Justin, getting emotionally attached, and because I guess if you overpay at the start, I don't want to sort of elaborate on that for your listeners. If you overpay, for the site, then you're squeezing everything else to try and achieve an outcome at the end. You're squeezing your builder, and then you're squeezing your agent at the end there as well to obviously try and sell off an end product. So I would say, for the listeners, it's important to do the due diligence. Use professionals. Make sure you get those numbers right, because at the end of the day, property development is a numbers game. And know the target market, know the area, know what's in demand, what the end product is in demand, and what's going to achieve, I guess the sales transactions that you require. So I just really, the advice I'd give to developers is just, make sure that you're aware of, you're aware of those numbers, because you need to be fully across those. And do not overpay at the beginning, because it will be uphill from there. You can't predict where the market would go. So just do your due diligence is probably the message that I would share with the audience.
Yeah, and I think that's where new developers or aspiring developers can get into trouble on their first project. It's because they don't know what numbers, what items they need to know or include in their feasibility. So they don't know what they don't know, and so they don't get included and they get missed.
Yeah.
What about best piece of advice that you've ever received?
I'd say don't accept no for an answer, Justin, and find an alternative solution. And probably I would also go back and say that in terms of being able to grow my own wealth, I've been able to retain some product as well. So I think at times, if you have a desirable product, you can. I would encourage your listeners. I can't give financial advice, obviously, but I would say that by retaining some stock, can grow essentially your own wealth as well. So that's probably the other advice I'll share there.
All right. Well, been awesome talking with you, Paul. Have you got any final parting words of advice or requests from the listeners?
I've got a few projects coming up, Justin, so I'm always interested in joint venture partners. So I'd encourage your listeners to get in contact with me if they're interested in some smaller developments, so either duplexes or some multi-units. So that's probably what I would just ask, Justin.
Well, how do they get in touch with you, Paul?
So there's a couple of ways. So I've got a website, so Raphael & Co Property Group. Throw it into Google, you'll find me pretty easy there. And probably emails are probably the best method. So it's paul.wilding, WILDING, at raphaelgroup.com.au.
And tell us about the name of the company. Is there any special significance to that?
Yeah, so look, it is named after my son. And then the wife said, well, what about if we have another? And I said, well, that's the Co.
Well, I hope that wasn't an invitation to her from you.
Oh, look, I know. One's hard enough at the moment, Justin. We'll see where things go.
That was a risky ploy there.
Yeah.
Get yourself in trouble.
Exactly.
Oh, it's funny. It's a bit of a theme, I think, with developers somehow finding ways of incorporating their kids into their project. I know I merged my two kids' name to come up with the new street name of the last project that I did, that they got a bit of a cheap thrill out of that.
Yeah, well, I have to say, my son's he's 4 years old. He's been on a number of development sites. Hopefully none of my builders are listening to the podcast at the moment. But from a young age, I've taken him through, and also encourage him to do whatever he wants to do in the long run. I've got a feeling, Justin, he may just be a developer. So, for example, if I'm going out on the road and I'm looking at a few sites, for example, I've got him in the back seat and he's identifying some dual occupancies and so forth, just by looking at letterboxes at the moment for me. So getting him started at a young age, and I think the plan probably would be at some stage I'd like to hand the reins over. So yeah.
Oh, I've met young Raphael. He showed me through your 6-unit site.
Yes, he did. Very, very
confident
quickly,
young man.
Yeah, might be an agent in him, maybe. So.
Well, I think, as I recall, he was trying to sell me one of your units.
Yeah, nothing wrong with getting him started early, Justin.
No, he was very direct, so it was good to see. All right, Paul, it's been so awesome having you on the show. Really appreciate what you've shared with us. I think there's been some absolute gold that you've shared with us today. I'm very grateful to you. Can't wait to see what your next project looks like, and good luck with all the future projects. Thanks for being on the Property Developer Podcast.
Thank you very much, Justin. I really appreciate the time and effort. So thank you.
All right. Catch you later, Paul.
Chat soon. See you, mate.
You've been listening to the Property Developer Podcast. Tune in next time for more tips, ideas and inspiration to take your developing to the next level. For more developing love, make sure to visit propertydeveloperpodcast.com.